It was a crisp Tuesday evening in Washington, D.C., and all the major networks had broken into regular programming to broadcast a special segment titled Restoring Justice in America, a live national address by FBI Director Kash Patel. The country was on edge. President Donald J. Trump, now in the second year of his return term, had promised Americans during his campaign a complete and transparent overhaul of the justice system, starting with the FBI, DOJ, and all institutions he said had been weaponized by political elites and leftist influencers. True to his word, he'd appointed Kash Patel as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a man known for his no-nonsense approach, loyalty, and deep knowledge of the intelligence community. Inside the White House press room, journalists were shuffling nervously, the air thick with suspense. On social media, hashtags like #CashLeaks, #JusticeSpeech, and #DrainItAll were trending. Conservatives anticipated vindication. Liberals feared a witch hunt. And somewhere in a luxurious Manhattan apartment, filmmaker and liberal activist Michael Moore sat on his leather couch, eyes glued to the screen, clutching a Diet Coke, fingers trembling ever so slightly. The broadcast cut to Director Patel, seated calmly across from Fox News' Tucker Carlson, who had been brought back to host the special segment. Patel's suit was perfectly pressed, his demeanor was laser-sharp, and his voice carried the weight of something that would shake the country to its core. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patel began, "tonight, I am not here to peddle politics. I am here to uphold the Constitution. What we are about to reveal has been under federal investigation for over 15 months. The findings are beyond disturbing." Moore leaned forward. He hadn't been this nervous since election night 2024 when Trump reclaimed the presidency. He had spent years building a brand on progressive filmmaking, attacking corporate America, highlighting social injustice, and lately, decrying Trump's fascism. But rumors had swirled for months that a high-profile probe was investigating potential media collusion with federal agencies during the previous administration, Patel continued. "We have verified internal communications between members of the previous FBI leadership, DOJ officials, and individuals in the entertainment and media industry, communications that show coordination in framing public narratives surrounding everything from the Russia hoax to COVID disinformation to political protest coverage." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "You're saying the FBI was working with members of the media to control public opinion?" "I'm saying," Patel clarified, "that certain members of the media were knowingly engaging in these efforts. Some were paid. Others were promised influence, protection, or worse, were threatened into compliance. And yes, some of these communications include direct contact with Michael Moore." Moore dropped his soda. It hit the floor with a loud thud, fizz spewing out in every direction. His mouth went dry. "No," he muttered to himself. "That's not possible." Back in the studio, Carlson flipped to a slide showing redacted emails and transcripts, complete with time-stamped metadata. "This," Patel pointed, "is just the beginning." The screen now displayed a dimly lit PDF document, unmistakably an FBI internal memo. Names were redacted, but only partially. Enough remained visible to stir the hornet's nest. "Here," Patel said, gesturing toward the text, "you can see the thread of communication involving an individual codenamed M. Monroe. A code we have confirmed refers to Michael Moore. This person was part of a clandestine circle of non-governmental influencers who were receiving early access to intelligence briefings, illegally." Tucker Carlson turned toward the camera. "Just to be clear, you're saying Michael Moore, the filmmaker, was being leaked classified materials from inside the FBI? Leaked and then weaponizing those materials to push disinformation via his films, social media presence, and liberal media circuits," Patel responded, unfazed. "This included scripting segments to undermine the 2020 and 2022 elections. In one document, we even see him consulting on how to frame the January 6th Capitol incident before the dust had even settled." Across the country, Moore's name lit up like a Christmas tree on X, formerly Twitter. Millions watched as Patel, with composure forged in the fires of intelligence and military service, dropped one truth bomb after another. It wasn't a smear campaign. It was a surgical unraveling of carefully spun lies. Meanwhile, Moore was spiraling. He grabbed his phone and frantically dialed his attorney, but the call wouldn't go through. His inbox was already flooded. Journalists, activists, even some of his own staff, wondering if what they were seeing on live television could be real. He turned the volume up again. Patel continued, "We have records of several financial transactions processed through shell companies and funneled into documentary film projects. We're talking about $4.2 million in anonymous consulting payments. These funds trace back to political PACs, some with foreign interests. We are now in contact with the IRS and DOJ special counsel." Michael's face turned white. "But he's just a filmmaker," one CNN pundit said on a separate live panel. "He's not a spy. He didn't have to be," responded a retired FBI agent who had turned whistleblower. "He was more useful than a spy. He shaped public perception. He became the emotional voice of the resistance. That's power, and it's now being traced back to corrupted sources." As America digested this astonishing reality, something else happened. Patel unveiled a list. "I will now read 10 names of individuals who will be receiving federal subpoenas within the next 48 hours in connection with this investigation. These subpoenas are for questioning, not judgment, but we expect full cooperation." The studio went silent. America leaned in. Michael Moore, Rachel Maddow, Don Lemon, Rob Reiner, Shonda Rhimes, Joy Behar, Ava DuVernay, George Stephanopoulos, Sean King, and an unnamed senior executive at Netflix. The audience watching live collectively gasped. Moore, still on his couch, felt like the floor had dropped from under him. All these names were high-profile, all had shown fierce opposition to President Trump, and now they were all under scrutiny. But the worst was yet to come. Tucker, adjusting his tie, asked one final question. "Director Patel, are criminal charges on the table?" Patel's answer was chilling. "Yes. If obstruction, bribery, and foreign influence operations can be confirmed in court, and I'm confident they can, then yes, criminal charges will follow." The screen faded to black with the American flag slowly waving and the words, "Justice is coming." Back in his apartment, Moore was no longer watching. He was pacing, hyperventilating, and surrounded by the scattered remains of a life that may never look the same again. BY sunrise. Manhattan was crawling with press vans. Outside Michael Moore's Soho apartment, news anchors reported live from the scene. Helicopters buzzed overhead like mechanical vultures waiting for the final blow. On his private floor, Moore sat in his kitchen in a bathrobe, still stunned from the night before. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emails were pouring in. PR firms, lawyers, media executives, some offering help, some asking questions, and some distancing themselves completely. The silence inside his apartment was broken only by the faint hum of CNN in the background, which, ironically, now featured him as the lead story. "Unprecedented," said one anchor. "Never before has an FBI director implicated major media figures live on national television." And the name at the center of the storm? Michael Moore. He muted the TV. Moore was no stranger to controversy. His documentaries had always walked a fine line between advocacy and provocation. Fahrenheit 9/11, Capitalism, A Love Story, Bowling for Columbine each had drawn heat, but nothing like this. Never had the federal government come after him directly. Until now. Across town, liberal think tanks and activist groups were holding emergency meetings. Panic rippled through the influencer ecosystem. Emails were deleted. Private chats were archived. Even veteran commentators were unsure how to respond. They had assumed Trump's return to power would be bluster and gridlock. They had severely underestimated the impact of appointing Kash Patel as FBI director. Meanwhile, inside the Hoover building, Patel was already in his third consecutive briefing of the morning. His leadership style was different from his predecessors. Less bureaucratic, more mission-driven. He'd reorganized task forces, brought in cybersecurity analysts from SpaceX, forensic accountants from the private sector, and even a few ex-CIA handlers who had lost faith in the old guard. His mission was simple: clean house. Inside a secure briefing room, he addressed a core team. "Last night was just the prelude," he told them. "Now we execute." His deputy, a former military intelligence officer, nodded and handed out updated files. Subpoenas were ready. Evidence packages were being prepared for congressional committees. Moore's name was circled in red, priority target, not just for potential criminal liability, but because of what he represented. The media's unchecked power to shape political narratives under the guise of entertainment. Back in New York, Moore finally reached his attorney, a high-priced DC litigator with deep connections in Hollywood. "Michael, you need to understand," the voice on the line said, "this isn't a tabloid scandal. This is a federal operation with forensic trails, subpoena power, and public momentum. We're not just talking about saving your reputation. We're talking about possible jail time." "Jail?" Moore whispered. "Yes, if they trace those payments to your production company and prove knowledge or intent, they will charge you with conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly even violations under the Foreign Agents Registration Act." "But I didn't know," Moore began. "Doesn't matter. You're in the frame. And if I were you, I'd be preparing a statement. Something humble. Something that distances you from others on that list." Moore hung up the phone and stared out his window. Far below, protesters had begun to gather, some waving American flags and signs that read, "Justice for all." Others carried Moore's image, demanding hands-off free speech. But the question loomed, was this free speech, or had lines been crossed? Back in DC, Kash Patel stood behind his desk, looking at a sealed envelope marked "Confidential Operation Echo Mirror." Inside was a dossier he hadn't yet released to the public. It detailed the final piece of the puzzle: surveillance footage, wire transfers, and audio logs of conversations between Moore's media team and foreign NGOs linked to intelligence fronts. He sighed. "This," he muttered to himself, "will break the dam." By noon, the White House briefing room was standing room only. The Trump administration, aware of the political and media earthquake Patel had triggered, called an unscheduled press conference. And standing at the podium, flanked by the American flag and seal of the president, was none other than Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Leavitt, poised and razor-sharp, surveyed the press corps with steely confidence. "As many of you are aware," she began, "last night, Director Kash Patel of the FBI, appointed by President Trump to clean up the deep state and restore integrity to federal law enforcement, revealed disturbing findings of unlawful collusion between media influencers and foreign-backed disinformation campaigns. This administration stands fully behind Director Patel and the ongoing investigation. We will not allow the American people to be lied to, manipulated, or betrayed again." A cacophony of hands shot up. CNN's correspondent was first to shout over the noise. "Caroline, are you saying the administration is labeling members of the media as criminals?" "We are not labeling anyone," she snapped. "We are following the evidence. And if that evidence leads to journalists who've acted as foreign agents, they will be held accountable, just like any other citizen." Gasps filled the room. Moore, watching from his apartment, knocked over a cup of coffee. His name was being spoken from the White House podium. His face had become the image of treachery on every cable news station. Legacy media was in a frenzy, and yet there was no counterattack. No scandal to distract. No staged leak. The deep state was cornered, and the public, especially working-class Americans in swing states, were rallying behind the probe. Across the Rust Belt, support for the Trump administration surged. Blue-collar voters, long suspicious of elite media narratives, felt vindicated. The idea that a multimillionaire filmmaker could be part of a shadowy influence operation only fueled their anger. It was no longer just a political scandal. It was a culture war. Meanwhile, in a secure location on Capitol Hill, Patel met with Senator J.D. Vance, the vice president's top intelligence liaison, along with several key lawmakers. They reviewed video footage captured by a cooperating witness, a former campaign advisor turned whistleblower. The clip showed a Zoom meeting. Michael Moore, surrounded by advisors and content editors, was speaking animatedly. "I don't care what the facts are. We shape the story. If we have to take creative liberties to stop this man from winning again, then that's what we do." That man, of course, was Trump. In the video, a younger staffer raised a concern. "But aren't we going to get caught if we're working with those consultants from Europe?" Moore's answer was a smirk and a dismissive wave. "Those consultants have been in the game longer than the FBI. Don't worry. They've covered our tracks. The footage ended, but its implications echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Patel leaned forward. This is no longer just a leak investigation. It's election interference. We'll be submitting this to the DOJ and special counsel immediately. Moore's legal team, aware of the pressure closing in, scrambled to launch a public defense. That evening, Moore's attorney appeared on MSNBC. My client denies all accusations. He is a filmmaker. He's entitled to freedom of expression and creative license. Any suggestion he was part of a foreign plot is outrageous. But Patel was prepared for this too. Just hours after the MSNBC segment aired, the FBI released redacted versions of the foreign fund routing records, routing numbers, shell corporations, and the exact timestamps. They didn't need Moore's admission. They had the receipts. The dam had broken. The media couldn't suppress it. The public was watching, and the truth was too loud to silence. Moore was officially served a subpoena the next morning. Agents, calm but direct, handed it to him at his apartment door. You're required to testify under oath, one said, and to bring all communications between you and the following individuals. He didn't recognize all the names, but one stood out like a punch to the gut. Klaus Wexler, a known intermediary from a Berlin-based PR firm with quiet ties to Eastern European intelligence networks. He closed the door slowly. The walls felt like they were closing in. 2 days later, the Capitol was buzzing with anticipation. The rotunda had rarely been so electric. Journalists, staffers, and members of Congress packed the halls as Michael Moore was escorted through a private side entrance under heavy security. The subpoena had worked. He would testify not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Kash Patel, standing tall in a crisp navy suit, watched silently from the hearing chamber. His mission, his years of investigation, and his iron resolve had led to this moment. The FBI had gone from being a captured institution under previous administrations to a fearless engine of truth under his command. The chair banged the gavel. This hearing of the House Intelligence Subcommittee on Media Manipulation and Foreign Interference will come to order. Today, we welcome Mr. Michael Moore. The room quieted as Moore took his oath. His once defiant face now looked weary. The lines around his eyes were deeper. The arrogance, absent. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a Trump ally and former prosecutor, was first to question him. Mr. Moore, are you aware that the PR firm Wexler Strategies, with which your production company signed a consulting agreement in 2022, has been linked by the Department of Justice to disinformation campaigns financed by foreign governments? Moore hesitated, then nodded. I became aware. Later. At the time, we thought they were just an aggressive digital agency. Did you ever question where the millions in international funding came from? No, he said flatly. I should have. But I didn't. Kash Patel didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply took notes. Then came the bombshell. Congressman Byron Donalds took the floor. Mr. Moore, let me read from an internal Slack message from your team. Quote, we need this to look like grassroots activism even if we're pushing it from paid accounts overseas. Michael said as long as it helps swing the suburbs, it's worth the optics. End quote. Did you send that message? Moore swallowed hard. Yes. Gasps echoed. Even liberal reporters scribbled wildly. The confession was more than just an oversight. It was an admission of media manipulation on a strategic, funded, and deliberate level, with foreign actors pulling the strings. The hearing continued for hours. Emails were read. Payments exposed. Moore's credibility unraveled in real time. But the final word belonged to Kash Patel. He was called to the witness table and addressed the chamber in a calm, commanding voice. For too long, this country has suffered from weaponized narratives. Not just by rogue officials in government, but by powerful media figures who cloaked political warfare in the robe of journalism. What we've uncovered is not just a crime. It's a betrayal of the American people's trust. We will prosecute, we will expose, and we will restore justice. Thunderous applause erupted from the gallery. The next day, the DOJ announced a formal investigation into Wexler Strategies and its affiliated nonprofits. Moore's production company was suspended from several platforms. Streaming services pulled his content, pending legal review. Sponsors vanished. Even his inner circle began leaking against him, claiming ignorance, distancing themselves. America watched, stunned, as one of the loudest anti-Trump voices had fallen not from censorship, but from accountability. President Trump, addressing a roaring crowd at a rally in Ohio, finally weighed in. They tried to rig the system. They tried to lie, cheat, and manipulate. But we have people like Kash Patel now, fighters for truth. And folks, isn't it funny? The guy who made all those movies turned out to be the biggest fiction of all. The crowd laughed. Chants of truth, truth, truth echoed across the fairgrounds. As for more, he retreated from the public eye. Lawsuits, both criminal and civil, loomed. His empire was crumbling. And though some die-hard fans defended him online, the tide had turned. Kash Patel, now a national figure of integrity and grit, continued his work, unraveling networks, protecting elections, and setting a new gold standard for law enforcement in the 21st century. America had witnessed the fall of a titan. But more importantly, it had seen what happens when power meets principle and principle wins.